Welcome to the captive audience. It is the 22nd of July. I'm Kevin Hoare, and I'm flying solo here tonight. But I've got a lot of news that, I haven't really been covering too much because we've had a series of really, really good interviews with state legislators, Republican state legislators, in the last few weeks. And I encourage you to check them out. They're really good. They really covered what was going on and gave you a chance not only to hear in depth about the issues in the legislative process, but get to know these legislators and get an idea of what they expect to be happening in the coming weeks and months. And there's actually no breaking news with regard to that, except for one item that I thought I might share with you right up front. Kind of fascinating, actually. The very state legislator who is the reason why the transportation bill failed. He's the main reason because the Democrats had enough votes. If all the Democrats voted for it to pass the tax that they wanted to pass, and also to um, make all the other spending allotments and changes they wanted, and they couldn't get Senator Mark Meek to go along. And then, of course, later, even more Democrats started to join his ranks on both sides, in both houses of the state legislature. But he was the one who effectively killed it, and they just weren't able to rely and shouldn't really expect Republicans to go along with that, because Republicans, as we heard from several of the state legislators, found that there was absolutely no compromise or no attempt to compromise or meet any of the interests or concerns that the Republican state legislators had for their constituents and in general for the state. So here's the kind of breaking news is that Senator Mark Meek uh, is proposing or suggesting to Governor Tina Kotek that there be a special session on transportation funding. So somebody probably went to work on him, and said, "It's your fault, pal," and took him behind closed doors and got out the proverbial, if not real, brass knuckles and said, the powers that be, the public employee unions, SEIU, they're really pissed. And they're sending a message to you in no uncertain terms that they're very, very unhappy. And, that actually works on Democrats because they rarely do what Mark Meek did, which he said was standing up for his constituents who were not prepared to pay for a transportation package like that. And he he did that, and it was a rare, courageous stand by a Democrat. But now he's saying that we need a special session. And he said he would agree to this special session only if, in the instance that the governor agrees to repealing the tolling law. And as you know, in his district, that was a big bone of contention. Republicans squarely against the tolling law. In the polling, as we've heard, um, the public is very much against the tolling, especially in Clackamas County along I-205, where they wanted to aim this. But then on top of that, we've done a show, at least one show, uh, no tolling before, or a vote before tolls, I believe is what it is. And it was an attempt to get a ballot initiative going that would address this. That ballot initiative is alive and still going and intends to move forward. And of course, the Democrats have been very shy in completing that tolling process. So, which, as you can think right now, that's at the heart of any transportation package potentially too. So that's what Mark Meek is saying. He's naming his price. He said, "I'm open to that." He said, "I told the governor I committed that if The final package looks good. I'm happy to be there, but one of my requests is to repeal ORS 382.150. And that statute has been on the books since 2017. It's one that directs the Oregon Transportation Commission to establish a toll program and assess the potential for tolls on Interstates 5 and 205. And 205, of course, goes right through his district. And it was to pay for roads and bridges, but there's been tons of political opposition, which has managed to get it to be reconsidered, they say in this article. And lots of planning obstacles, because you know what? The state of Oregon just plain sucks at planning. And as we've seen, they've studied so many things and in many cases done nothing. Like the Rose Quarter, that was also in that budget from 2017, and that never happened. And that wasn't waiting for tolling. That was waiting for them to spend the money using from the tax that they raised on gas at that time, and I think several other fees, and they never did it. So anyway, Mark Meek said this in a brief interview on Sunday, and this is probably the biggest news relating to the special session that you could expect at this point. Apparently, the governor is, quote, assessing next steps, unquote, and is also in discussion with other state leaders because they really screwed that up. The Senate president removed Mark Meek from the Transportation Committee and then cast a vote forcing it to the floor, which then led to this calamitous and stupid process that resulted in nothing passing before the end. And by calamitous and stupid, I don't mean the fact that nothing passed. I mean the fact that they totally mismanaged this and stepped all over their own folks arrogantly. And yes, it is true that there is there $28 million is the budget of the department that does the DEI in ODOT. That, according to E. Warner Reschke, the state representative that I interviewed a few weeks ago, who shared that with us. So that's the answer, Lori. And this is quite something that they may repeal the tolling law, but I somehow think that even if they do it, they'll do it with some conditions. It won't be a straight up repeal, not like we could do with an initiative at the ballot. And the Democrats are deathly afraid of this becoming an issue in a future state legislative campaign, because in that district, Mark Meek won, I think it was by less than 1,000 votes over Bill Kennemer, the incumbent Republican. And the next step, there will be an election and a vote in his race, and I think he's very concerned that this is going to be front and center. This is a very expensive race, but if you go the wrong way on tolling, or you don't do something about tolling, you're probably not getting reelected in that district, without something else changing along the way. And so keep an eye on that. I want to raise your awareness on one thing. There's a biannual study conducted for the State Office of Economic Analysis. It's supposed to help lawmakers determine how to spend transportation funds. And the group doing it is called ECO Northwest, ECO in Northwest. And it is the group that you will always hear is making absolutely gobs of money doing studies that are essentially pre-baked to vindicate and support and advocate for the Democrats' policies. And so expect them to be tapped for anything that happens here in the near future. They're the ones who have proposed all these harebrained ideas. And then Democrats go and say, see, very smart people gave us this report and told us this is what we've got to do. So anyway, ODOT has been laying off people. They've laid off 483 workers and canceling some road projects, and said that they're saying we're not going to fix roads and we're not going to plow snow. Expect all that to be the impact. And I think what we have to do is hold the Democrats accountable for ignoring the proposal by Republicans that we heard of from several of these state legislators I've interviewed over the past several weeks. That proposal said, here's how you do it by prioritizing the things that people really want from transportation, which is, it's not DEI and it's not a whole bunch of these other fanciful big ticket projects. It is making sure that our roads are adequate for the traffic, repaired, lined properly, as we heard yesterday in the interview that I did with Boomer Wright. And of course, keeping all of the line workers that are needed. Now, there are people that probably are in the administration, as that's become top heavy, the administrative side of things that are starting to maybe, as with any business that we've seen, become too top heavy. And we also know that they're spending a lot of money renting a building in Salem, of which they're not using the top 2 floors. So, but the people are out there actually doing the work on the roads. That's something to look at. Another thing to look at, of course, is how much ODOT is being used to clean up the trash from homelessness. In some areas of the state, I've actually heard of upwards of 30% of the money that's being spent by ODOT in that area is being used to clean up trash repeatedly from the drug addicted urban campers that throw it everywhere and live outside and are not held accountable for that. So keep an eye on that one. So that's the big, breaking news I think I can share with you straight up that's at the state level. I'll cover a couple of other state level stories, and then I want to dig into some national stuff because there's been some big national stuff, and it's been happening the last few days. And I really think that we need to keep an eye on what's happening there because something really changed in the last couple of days. Oregon, according to CNBC, ranks among the most expensive states in the country. They said the cost of housing is chewing up household budgets in the Beaver State. Housing. We know there's a shortage, and we know that the government is the chief cause of this. Now, interest rates being higher than they were a few years ago is one of those things, but President Trump's working to get those interest rates lowered, and we'll talk about that here shortly. However, the housing affordability in the state of Oregon, we've seen prices go up dramatically, and that is caused directly by the lack of availability of housing, which is directly related to both the lack of availability of land, which is in control, the Democrats are in control of at every level of government in the state. And it's also due to the permitting process for these housing developments to actually build. And how do I know that? Well, apparently people in Portland know that. So let me start first that Oregon ranks among the most expensive because of how it's handled the supply of housing. And it's a supply issue. The only thing, there is demand that at times is declining for housing, and that's people leaving the state because it's just too expensive and overregulated and frankly, at times dangerous thanks to the inane policies of the Democrats. But Portland also, the city council knows that this is what's happening. How do they know it? Because they've decided to temporarily waive development fees. Why? To spur housing. It was a 10-0 vote of the city council, which it's a unanimous vote. There's more than 10 people on it, but apparently some of them must be, on vacation or something, because it's not like there's any, urgent matters in Portland to deal with for these newly elected individuals. But the Portland City Council knows that the cost of fees and that's the direct cost, and then there's also the time cost of waiting for permits to be issued. That is going to that also affects things. If it takes a year after you have a property and you have people interested in buying a house, but it needs to be built, if it takes an extra year to do it and they add on a bunch of requirements, the figure I've heard in a $400,000 home is it adds 100 grand to the price. 100 grand. That doesn't make it more affordable. That makes it less affordable in just about every way you can define it. Yes, Washington County is threatening a property tax increase of 68% on the library fee. And that library fee, the libraries are funded out of the general fund to a great extent. So what they are doing there, Bobby, is they are raising a property tax that relates to the library so that they can have the library not take up that amount of money from the general fund, so they can take the general fund and they can go spend it on DEI and other things, because they don't want to raise the main property tax, which, by the way, I think has not been raised in 25 years in Washington County. I think it's about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, Republicans went from being in charge or nominally in charge of the Washington County Commission, the 5-member commission, to now in the minority. And one of the Republicans that is on it isn't terribly reliable sometimes at voting to oppose these policies. So, when Roy Rogers had retired, decided that it's time to move on, he's the last one, the real conservative. And then we used to have Andy Dyke, and in the past we had Tom. I can't remember his name, but he was actually a pretty fiscally conservative county commissioner. Now we've got left-wing nut jobs and worse running it. So expect your taxes to go up in Washington County. But Portland never wants to be outdone, because what is Portland doing? Portland is now preparing to push get this, 75% property tax hike. Taxpayers in Portland will be asked in November to increase by 75% the amount they pay in taxes to support city parks, trails, community centers, swimming pools, and other recreational services. An analysis by Axios says that Portland Parks and Recreation Bureau spends about $233 per resident on parks, compared to the national average of $124. That is an 80% increase, more than other park departments. And the proposal would replace the expiring levy of 80 cents per 1,000 with an 1,000 assessed property value with one that's $1.40. That means that the owner of a $221,600 home, which is the median home value in Portland, the median, would see their parks levy jump from $177 a year to $310 if it's approved. Commercial property owners who pay $251 a year would pay $440. And of course, the 11-member city council voted unanimously to put the increase on the November ballot, which would raise $84 million. If it fails, parks officials say they'll need to cut $90 million from their $170 million annual budget and lay off half its staff, which would bring them in line with the amount spent nationally on average. So this is what's happening, is as they start to run out of the gravy train, which was the federal money that was flying in with all kinds of dumb programs, whether it's DEI or climate justice, or just let's just throw helicopter money at everything. The Democrats are running out of that money at the state level. They're running out of it at the local level. And now they're starting to come out and they're trying to raise your taxes. Apparently, none of the Portland City Council members are concerned what might happen to their seats if they do this. So that just tells you that, yes, elections have consequences. They sure do. And that's what Portland is doing. By the way, did I post? Yeah, I did. I posted the development fee waiver. So, and the reason why I'm telling you this is because this is what's being done everywhere. Eugene actually had a fire fee that they wanted to raise dramatically, that actually 80% of which wasn't going to the fire department. It was actually going to a bunch of programs they can't sell to voters that uh, they are running a deficit paying for, such as um, programs that house but don't get people out of addiction. Yes, that's right. The old housing first, harm reduction programs that have seen a dramatic increase in Eugene, and they spend gobs of money, but it gets worse. And they know they can't sell people on that anymore to pay for that. So they masked it as a fire fee. They abandoned that recently because even the quasi liberal, somewhat woke Eugene Chamber of Commerce said, no, we can't go there. That's too much. And they finally dropped the whole idea after facing a recall of that city increase. So this says something is that we're now in an era that the Democrats are out looking for money, whether it's the transportation budget, which apparently isn't being funded sufficiently for the things that they're doing that they probably shouldn't be doing, or the projects they never get done. And they've also seen, of course, a decrease in what the gas tax is able to collect, in part because people have bought electric vehicles and other more efficient vehicles, which they said they had to do or really must do by 2035. And so yeah, they're starting to find that they don't have enough in their general fund because they went and spent all this money that really should have been temporary COVID money, or helicopter money from the Biden administration, the Build Back Better BS, and all that. The infrastructure bill that apparently didn't build much infrastructure around here in Oregon, not that I can see. And so now they're in a pickle and they're looking for any place they can get some money. Expect to continue hearing about that in every corner of the state. Meanwhile, they simply will punish people by defunding and cutting the things that people really do want government to do, so they can keep funding DEI and climate justice and projects for their pet donors, that the homelessness industrial complex, all that stuff. That's what's going to continue happening until we put a stop to it at the ballot box. What is the consequence? Well, in a state that in the past was known for growing year on year, decade on decade, we're starting to see a decline, and that is being exacerbated by something else. Nationally, half the states in the country have more deaths than they do births, including Oregon. And that's been true since 2020. But Oregon has an unusually aging population and an especially low birth rate. So apparently in Oregon, deaths outnumber births 2-1. So in other words, other than, of course, people immigrating to the state, and we know some of those people are not coming legally, the state is shrinking. The current population is shrinking. And of course, that's on top of the number of people who are leaving. And then if they want some of these people to hang around well into retirement and keep paying things like property taxes, we just heard last week that that the estate tax, the death tax, is one of the worst in the nation, if not the worst, and is likely to apply to people who only have $1 million in assets, which they like to say is a millionaire, but then you're a millionaire if your house plus your 401k adds up to more than $1 million, and that is a lot of people, potentially most people actually, because of inflated housing values that we just heard about are no longer affordable in many places in the state, in the country, and the fact that that's savings. Are like, I'm not a millionaire, I just saved that money up working. Yes. Well, apparently the state of Oregon wants to tax you until you're gone, but one way or the other. But the deaths to births ratio is pretty out of kilter in this state, which means that another thing is going to happen. In the long run, the tax base is going to atrophy. Yes, it's going to shrink. And they're going to have to hope that they can attract new people here. But how are they going to attract anybody who wants to come and pay higher and higher taxes and pay for less and less affordable housing? Who wants to do that? That's a great question, an answer to which nobody in the Democrat leadership is actually spending any time on, because they are too busy making sure that government prospers at the expense of the citizens. So now it is true that in some of our larger counties, Multnomah and Washington, births still do outnumber deaths. And but over time, we're going to see this spread to other counties, because all the policies in place discourage families in so many different ways, and we know some prominent ways that takes place. It also discourages businesses from coming here, and it discourages younger people from coming here to get jobs in those businesses. So yeah, a lot of people are leaving, Bobby, and it is consequential. And of course, yeah, our parks are full of homeless and drug dealers, so it's not a very good sell, actually, for let's go spend more money to make sure that those places are populated by drug dealers and homeless. That's not why we're paying for parks, and so they have an optics problem, don't they? Well, why don't we shift now to some national level news, because I don't think that there was anything in particular that I had to cover right now, not since yesterday. That's compelling. Well, there is one other story. I'll give you this. Oregon's pandemic kindergartners, so the ones who were in kindergarten when the pandemic hit, that are preparing to go to middle school now, have critical reading gaps. And again, we didn't hear the Democrats talking about this, because that would be to admit that the Student Success Act and many other things they did are a failure. And they don't have a plan for fixing it right now, except to spend lots more money. And we heard yesterday from Representative Boomer Wright, a former public school teacher, that there are so many things that they aren't doing to support teachers being able to control their classroom and have the things that they need in order to teach. It's a bunch of administrative fat that's growing on this, but to programs that don't educate any kids. And he called that out, and he knows what he's talking about. And he is part of the solution in the stuff he's trying to do. But this is how far off the mark the Democrats are and how slowly they're moving. And now we've got some kids that, frankly, didn't learn to read sufficiently. So now they're going to have a hard time reading to learn in all their other subjects, and they're going to fall further and further behind. I almost feel like they should be able to file a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against someone, maybe the teachers union or whoever they can say is responsible for this, because that's quite a deficiency, and one that needs extraordinary action to fix. Let's see. There is one other story I'll give to you. The Taxpayers Association of Oregon, OregonWatchdog.com, came out with just a very brief story that says that a social media influencer who chronicles how Antifa and the anarchist movement in Portland functions said that it looks like they're adopting Roman-era battle techniques, like building a human wall of shields in order to slowly advance upon Portland's ICE facility. And there's a video that you can go watch that shows this happening. And that's a good segue into the national news, because there's been a lot of national news that's worth paying attention to that relates to all of this stuff that I just talked about. And the biggest news, I think, in the country right now is that Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has made a criminal referral to the Department of Justice regarding people in the Obama administration who knew, and contrary to intelligence reports that have been issued all the way up until December of 2020, decided that they wanted to create and exaggerate and promote intelligence that led to the Russia collusion um, conspiracy, which being an investigation, the Russia collusion investigation, which has been debunked as not only false, but perhaps, and this is the latest thing, apparently they're saying, and President Trump said this, that President Obama knew this and was actually at the helm of approving this course of action in December of 2020. And they say they have documentary proof of this that is now being put forward. And the Department of Justice is being encouraged to look into it and potentially look into what President Obama did to make this happen. And President Trump came right out today and said, this is treason. Barack Hussein Obama is the ringleader. Hillary Clinton was right there with him, his Secretary of State. And so was Sleepy Joe Biden, his vice president. So were the rest of them. Former Director Comey of the FBI, former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. They tried to rig an election and they got caught. In other words, they tried to rig the 2016 election with this. And then they used it to definitely influence the outcome of the 2018 congressional elections, because as you recall, that was front and center. The Russia collusion investigation didn't conclude in time for that election. It continued on into March of the next year and then crashed and burned. But they did use it as a talking point that they had created and reinforced all the way through the 2020 election, continuing to repeat that that he was a Russian asset, that he was soft on Russia, which was false, that he was wholly suspect for these things that actually turned out to be entirely deep state phony inventions. And we never got to the bottom of it while Trump was during his first term. It started gradually to come out during Biden's term, bit by bit, but now it's a torrent. And but President Obama responded today, saying he rejected the accusations of treason, stating that the allegations are outrageous enough to warrant an official response, because apparently he usually doesn't say anything. He works through minions. And so we have kind of a big to-do that's going to come together here. And I think it has to come together quickly, because the people that did this got away with it. By the way, I learned something today. There are some flash drives of email correspondence that contained very highly secret correspondence that Hillary Clinton, in the Clinton email investigation, that were never thoroughly reviewed during that investigation. The one that James Comey came out and said no reasonable person would charge her. Well, you know what happened? You know who was in charge of reviewing those flash drives and didn't do it? Andrew McCabe, and I'm trying to remember the name of the other guy, but it's the other guy, the two guys that were at the heart of the Crossfire Hurricane phony investigation once Trump was in office. Those two guys. Maybe you guys can remember his name, but I just heard it's those two guys. Gee, I wonder why that didn't happen. Well, because these guys are sworn enemies of Trump, and they swore to, quote, get Trump somehow. So this is a big deal. Those guys have not experienced any legal consequences for what they did. They botched purposely an investigation of Hillary Clinton to exonerate her. No wonder she wasn't that concerned about it. And Peter Strzok, exactly. Peter Strzok. And so this is insane. This has so damaged people's trust in the justice system and being fair and non impartial, uh, and to restore that, frankly, these folks have to be investigated and held fully accountable. Some of them might actually not face criminal charges. I don't know if President Obama even could, but they should be compelled to tell the truth under criminal penalty if they don't. And I think it's time that that happened. Some people say this is dwelling on the past. No, it's not. This is essential for the future. We have to do this because the future's at stake, because they will do it again. They will do it again the next time they get these reins of power. And let them debate and argue with the truth. In fact, let them try to lie. I think it's time that they be held accountable for that. Some other good news is that the rescission package passed, and that rescission package was essentially a set of Doge driven cuts that was only $9 billion, but it was the start quite of something. And rescission is a function that's similar to reconciliation on the budget side. It's like sort of the photo negative of what you do there. You actually can have the executive branch propose to Congress a set of cuts, and Congress, under its own laws that it passed, can, with a simple majority vote in both houses, approve those cuts. And I think they have 60 days to do it. And they actually did it. And there was some doubt it would make it through both houses, but it did. Part of that package was to cut the funding for NPR and so National Public Radio and the public broadcasting system in the country. And I think I'm done paying for something that we already have plenty of media outlets. People can start a media outlet. They can reach everybody everywhere through the internet. Why are we paying? We're using tax dollars to pay for it. And by the way, we're paying for something that is so completely slanted and one-sided that they just are a propaganda arm of the Democrats. Let them go and be a propaganda outlet and compete with everyone else on and try to get whatever they want. If it's advertising, fine. If it's getting members and donors to do it, great. But I think it's time for those outlets to survive based on the quality of their reporting and the reliability of the reporting. If people love it, good. It'll be around, but I don't want to pay for it anymore. Any more than they would want to pay for, Fox News or Newsmax or the Wall Street Journal, right? In fact, I don't want any of them paying for anything. We know that they found a whole bunch of money that was being spent on the website Politico by the what's the foreign aid entity that they, in essence, closed the doors of early in the second Trump administration here. Those guys spent tens of millions of dollars essentially funding and bribing Politico. And they got results from it. So I think this is something that we all need to pay attention to, because the Democrats are going to try to bring it back, and we have to make sure it doesn't come back. I know there's a concern about local news. Again, how do you do that? There's a group that is local media called Lookout. And in Eugene, they got one called Lookout Eugene or Eugene Springfield. And it's got some donor support. It's not paid for by the government. It's got private foundations funding it, and it has membership fees. There you go. Go do that. If that works, knock yourself out. If you want to read it or not read it, it's up to you. But there are there has been a problem with the model of local newspapers. They have not been economically viable, and they've also cut local reporting. But then we've got a lot of citizen reporters that come out and monitor and report. Independent journalists have actually become one of the biggest sources. Just think how many stories you've seen from Andy Ngo or Kevin Dahlgren right here in Oregon about Antifa, about homelessness and the homelessness industrial complex. they're the truth tellers out there, and they're sharing their stuff, which you can find on OregonCatalyst.com. They get highlighted on a regular basis, or you can just go see it yourself directly on X and Facebook and so on. But Democrats wanted to plow money into local media by taxing Google and Facebook. And as much as those companies might seem to deserve having their revenues curtailed, actually all it would have resulted in is none of those outlets would have their content used on Google and Facebook anymore. It would be banned because it would have just had. I mean, it's a typical harebrained idea that Democrats come up with, and even there's a former Biden White House staffer, Michael LaRosa, who went on Fox News to detail how they were able to get the media to not report on Biden's cognitive failure. And they bullied and shamed the media. Imagine if the local media was dependent on the whims of the government, and particularly Governor Tina Kotek, for their funding. Gee, I wonder if they'll actually do Tina Kotek an extra solid by giving her the kind of reporting that helps her get reelected. So there was a bill here in Oregon that died, Senate Bill 686, and it died, and it needs to stay dead because it is. I wouldn't say it's the law of unintended consequences, but it's the moral hazard of having the government try to subsidize media. It turns into government-funded media, which we just got rid of at the federal level. Amen. Few more national news stories that I think are worth touching upon. This is kind of breaking news here. The House Judiciary Committee has accused the Biden FBI of creating a false narrative about Catholic Americans. They went and had said a bunch of conservative Catholics were actually terrorist collaborators. And not only was this on its face absurd and a violation of religious freedom, but they actually targeted people because of they were trying to go and claim that some priest wouldn't tell them what took place in a private conversation with a parishioner, a Catholic priest. And they were claiming that these traditional Catholics, they issued documents that tried to validate the idea that that conservative Catholics are in fact a danger to the country. The people who did this, for want of a better word, need to experience the closest thing that the U.S. justice system can deliver to crucifixion. I think that's fair to say, because people must believe that this will never happen again. And there is a way to do that. There is a way to do that, which is not only to go after and hold accountable the people and force the truth out of the people who did this, but also to make sure that there is legal barriers to this ever happening again, severe criminal penalties. And they were trying to create a false narrative, and they were using power that they had to just cause this to happen to people that had no idea that the federal government was targeting them. So I think that this is the beginning of an important thing that's going to take us forward here. A couple other really good national news stories, and then I'll wind up here for tonight. The U.S. Olympic Committee has banned transgender athletes from competing in women's sports, straight up. And I think that just shows that we're not going back to where biological males are going to go and compete at the highest level of these sports, which in many cases is the Olympics. Women that spend decades not only being women, but devoting tens of thousands of hours preparing and competing to become the best, only to have somebody who believes that they're female but is entirely a biological male for the purposes of their competitiveness in that athletic event, coming in and just defeating them by good measure is cruel. And in many cases, as we saw with boxing, uh, in the case of a boxer, female boxer who had to compete against a trans boxer from Africa, it nearly killed her. It's dangerous, and so we just can't have that at all anymore. And I believe that this is going to seal the deal because all those sports can't produce somebody now that's valid to go to the highest level, and I don't think it's ever going to be reversed. I think that maybe this is one of these great permanent victories that we've been looking for. But of course, you never know because a lot of the Democrat Party still fully bet on this as being the most important thing, one of the most important issues, and they see the issue entirely differently. But I think it is going to represent a permanent shift in public opinion on that. Last story. Um, the economy uh, is really something that turns out to shape elections, right? And there's a one piece of news that happened today. Trump is lowering Japan's tariffs to 15% after they've reached a tentative trade deal with Japan, which is great because that is exactly what he said he was gonna do. Democrats are running around pretending like they really don't like tariffs, while for decades they loved them. But President Trump is using it to produce free and fair trade, and in this case, with one of America's largest trading partners and one of the largest economies in the world, Japan. I think we're going to see that trade is going to be free and fair going forward, and they know he means it. And frankly, we're going to be better friends with the country of Japan because this is how friends should treat each other. This is what they should do, especially friends that have defense uh, relationships where we're supposed to be there, in this case, really for Japan, should they be attacked by China, which of course is in our interest to deal with China as well and protect the United States. Well, that's an ally. Well, this is finally going to seem much more like the kind of ally that's on the same page and is fair with regard to our economic relationship. Just think, this has been going on since the 80s, and Trump is fixing things that people didn't think could be fixed. Here's the great story that you need to know, and let this counter the narrative that you're hearing in the media from Democrats. There are people trying to say that Republicans are in trouble. And it is true that midterm elections don't tend to go the way of the party who holds the presidency. And especially if that party only holds something like the House of Representatives, which every seat's up for election, by a very narrow margin, one of the narrowest in history. However, CNN highlighted a campaign poll showing that the political party favorability, or what they call the generic ballot, for seats in the federal House of Representatives in past midterm elections at this point in time, so the July of the odd numbered year before a midterm election in 2005, July 2005, George W. Bush, and we had actually a trifecta. We controlled all three houses of Congress, and it was 2006 was the midterm. 2006 didn't go that well, but Democrats had a 7% lead. 7% on the generic ballot. It's what they measure things against before they have candidates for a lot of these challenger races. In July of 2017, in the middle of the first year of Trump's first term, Democrats had a 33% favorability rating. 33%, which of course we know that was the whole Russia collusion thing we just talked about. July of 2025, Republicans have a 12% lead in the generic ballot. 12%. That is a good place to be. I think the economy is going to get better. I think the one big beautiful bill is actually going to, along with many of the other things going on and the work that's being done with tariffs now, going to create a booming economy a year from now as energy prices plummet. And frankly, we see a lot of these wars and security problems around the world start to get wound up and resolved because we actually have a peace through strength president who's serious and is holding other places in the world, allies, accountable for taking up their own defense, like in Europe. This could be an amazing place we're in 1 year from now. And that spells serious problems for a Democrat Party that appears to have learned nothing from the election of 2024. They've doubled and tripled down on all of these policies that they lost on. And maybe this is the best result for what we could expect. And these other investigations are just going to add to this, the ones that we've talked about. And I think we need to follow through on this because we got to shut the door on some of this behavior to manipulate elections, which, as we know, Democrats accuse Trump and Republicans of doing, but the ones who were really doing it were the people that were projecting it onto Republicans, and it was the Democrats. So take a look at this news about the polling and keep track of that. Maybe this isn't very good news for Tina Kotek either, and for some of these state legislators that on the Democrat side that expect to hold on to a supermajority, or the 3 fairly competitive seats for Congress in our state. Let's do our work. Let's make sure people know, and let's continue to fight the good fight. Thank you for watching tonight. Please share the show with everyone you can. I'll have some more interviews next week, and we'll have Don Anderson with the Dad Rants tomorrow night on the Captive Audience. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.